What's up, my viewers, my bros and hoes? How's it going, everybody? This is Nonsensical Cinemas bringing you another episode of Nonsensical Talks, which is a new talk show that I have started where I discuss topics that I'm passionate about and any topics you guys suggest in the comments below that revolve around the YouTube community or, cinemas, anything. And today, we're going to be talking about a question that I've been thinking about my entire life. This is an age-old question. People have been asking this since the dawn of time, or since this board game existed. The question is, who killed Mr. Body in Clue? For those of you who don't know what Clue is a board game slash movie, which revolves around, it's like a mystery game, a mystery movie where pretty much what happens is 6 people are invited to this mansion that's owned by this guy named Mr. Body. And this guy has been blackmailing those 6 people. And during the night, I think, when they're in a room, the power shuts off. And when it comes back on, Mr. Body's dead. Sometime during the night, Mr. Body is killed. So the game, in the board game, the objective is to collect cards and mark down on a little sheet throughout the game as you discover new cards to ultimately guess out of which 3 cards that were picked and put away in a separate file who killed Mr. Body, which room they killed him in, and what did they kill him with. And those are 3 cards selected before the game. The card types are weapon, person, and room, and they're put away in a separate slip that you have to guess about. Now, a movie was also made about this game. It stars Christopher Lloyd, Tim Curry, Madeline Kahn. It's actually got quite a bit of talent. And it's not a bad movie. But in the movie, they actually do something based off the board game, and it's a little different. However, it's still pretty much the same. It has the same concept. And I own this movie, and I've been watching it since I was a kid, and there's 3 different endings to the movie. And I've always been wondering, which of those endings is the real ending? Which one is most probable? Who was the most likely to commit the murder in the context of the movie? So today we're going to look and we're going to see if we can figure it out. Now, before I start, some plot points to consider throughout the movie are these. There's a couple of very, very important parts throughout the movie that you really got to focus on. You got to pay attention on who is in the shot, who you can see, and who is where. And I'm just going to point those out right now. So, first of all, there is a scene, if you've never seen the movie Clue, I'm going to try and give a good context as to what I'm talking about. There is a scene where everyone is gathered in the study, which is a room in the house that they're in. And everyone has been given a weapon because Mr. Body wants them to kill the butler Wadsworth, who has gathered evidence to expose Mr. Body of blackmail. The evidence also incriminates the guests. I have to point that out. So Mr. Body hands out weapons and then shuts off the lights saying, you guys have the opportunity to kill Wadsworth in secrecy and then we can leave and act like none of it ever happened. Lights go off, and when the lights turn back on, Mr. Body is seen on the floor. There was a gunshot in the dark and he's found dead in the room. Now, at this point, I want to point something out. The cook in the house, Mr. Body's cook, is in the kitchen. The maid, Yvette, is in the billiard room listening to the entire thing happening. And all the guests, Wadsworth and Mr. Body, are in the study behind a closed door. And that their conversation is being tape recorded. That's what's going on there. Now, there's another point right after this that I want to focus on. And that is, after the lights have been turned on, after a little bit, they hear a scream out in the hallway. And they leave the hallway and head to the billiard room, which is closed. The maid Yvette is in the billiard room. Now, if you notice, if you look at the scene where they're running to the billiard room, you can see that everyone goes to the doorway except for Mrs. Peacock, which is a character. There's Mrs. Peacock, Colonel Mustard, Miss Scarlet, Mr. Green, Professor Plum, and Mrs. White. That's Miss Peacock. And she's kind of dragging behind the crowd. She has gotten hit in the face, don't get me wrong, but she's behind everyone. She's kind of tailing behind. And then if you notice, when they confront Yvette in the billiard room, Mrs. Peacock is not in the doorway. Now just remember that. She is not in the billiard room doorway when they go to Yvette screaming. Now, if you go fast forward a little bit more to the kitchen, what happened was they were arguing about, is there anyone else in the house? And they thought, okay, the cook. The cook isn't in the house. So they run to the kitchen to go see the cook, to see, where she is, and they don't find her. And then when they open up the freezer, she's dead. Her dead body's in the freezer. Now, if you notice when Colonel Mustard approaches Wadsworth, you can see that Mrs. Peacock and Professor Plum cannot be seen in the back. However, I will point out that when everyone ran in initially, they were there. So everyone had arrived at the scene originally. They were there at first, but they had disappeared for about a minute and a half, and then were seen again when Colonel Mustard approaches Mrs. Peacock. I'm also going to point out that Yvette, the maid, never went to the kitchen. We never see her in the kitchen. Okay, now fast forward even more in the movie. They start to search the house because they want to see if there's more people. And what they do is they draw matches. They draw lots. And whoever gets paired the same size match gets put on a certain floor. Smallest go in the cellar, largest go in the attic. So Professor Plum and Mrs. Peacock go to the cellar. Colonel Mustard and Mrs. Scarlet go to the first floor. And Wadsworth and Mrs. White go to the second floor. And then Mr. Green, and Yvette go to the attic. So remember that. That's where everyone is. Now that we know these facts, we're going to look at which ending is most probably true, just on those facts alone. So the first ending attempts to prove that Yvette killed Mr. Body and the cook, and then Mrs. Scarlet killed all the other guests. I should mention at this point that there was 6 murders altogether. There was the cook, Yvette, and Mr. Body. However, throughout the night, a motorist showed up whose car broke down. He showed up at the house. Then a cop showed up, an off-duty cop, and then a singing telegram girl showed up after a blackout happened and was killed. All those people I just mentioned were killed by someone. And this tries to explain that Miss Scarlet killed Yvette, the motorist, the cop, and the singing telegram girl, and Yvette killed the Mr. Body and the cook. Starting with Yvette, it's very, very possible that she killed the cook and Mr. Body for these 2 reasons. Number 1, she was not in the kitchen when the cook was killed. What happened in the movie was when the gunshot fired off in the study, when Mr. Body was initially killed, the bullet only grazed his ear. He wasn't killed. He was still alive. He was just pretending to be dead. So when everyone went to the kitchen, they left him alone. And when they returned from the kitchen, his body had disappeared. Now, since Yvette was not the only one that wasn't in the kitchen, it's most probable that she was the one who killed Mr. Body. She definitely had the motive to. Plum and Peacock could have done it, but it would have been very hard for them to pull off. I think Yvette had the easiest opportunity to kill him, as she wasn't even there. She had hung back in the study, as we have to assume. And also, it's very possible she killed the cook. Because if you remember, she was in the billiard room as the commotion was going on with the weapons in the study when Mr. Body was killed. So while Mr. Body was being killed, or attempted to be killed, she could have been running to the kitchen and killing the cook and then running back. Because remember, the door was closed. They can't see into the hallway. So she has complete concealment as long as she stays quiet to kill the cook and run back to the billiard room and then scream and everyone run to her. So this way, she isn't suspectable. They say, oh, she was in the billiard room. She was screaming in there. She has an alibi. Now, the second part of this, it's also extremely, extremely possible Miss Scarlet committed all the other murders. Colonel Mustard and her were searching different rooms when the motorist was killed and when the power was shut off. They were assigned the first floor. So they had access to the first floor. That means that in the dark and even, in the light when these murders took place, they could easily move around the first floor from room to room and not be suspected. Plus, they were searching separate rooms at one point, her and Colonel Mustard. So Colonel Mustard, he wouldn't see her when she moved about. He would be in a room, and then she would wait till he was behind closed doors to move about and kill the motorist and kill all these people in the dark. So it was her access to the ground floor that made it easier for her to maneuver from room to room, and also to shut out the power with ease, because if in the movie it's someone kills the power halfway through, which blacks out the entire house, and then the last 3 murders are committed. So since she was on the ground floor, she had access to the cellar door, which had the power switch. Therefore, she could easily turn the power off without being suspected. She would just have to wait until there was no one in the hall, like Colonel Mustard, and then she's home free. Also, there is one point in the dark where we see footage of people like struggling in the dark, like because they can't see, so they're bumping into stuff. They're like screaming. They're talking to people in the dark, and we don't see footage of Miss Scarlet. If you focus on the movie, I noticed in the movie that you don't see footage of Miss Scarlet maneuvering around in the dark. You see footage of pretty much everyone else except for her. So she's unaccountable during this time period, and that's an issue. After the lights are turned back on by Wadsworth, we also see her towards the back of the house on the first floor. She had the back, I don't know if it was a back door or a door to like a ballroom or something she had opened. And then she kind of twirls around a bit to make it look as if she's coming out of a different room. So she's acting suspicious when the lights turn back on. So there has to be a reason for it. Maybe it's because she killed those 3 people. I have to point this out too. The motorist was behind the first person she killed, or at least what this ending says she killed, was behind locked doors. They locked the door with a key, and Wadsworth had the key. She didn't have access to the key. So, how did she get to the door? Well, there was a secret passageway from the room, the conservatory, that led to the lounge. And she used this to get into the lounge to kill the motorist. However, how would she know about this secret passage? Well, she was in cahoots with Yvette, is what this ending tries to explain, is that her and Yvette were working together tonight, and Yvette was acting under Miss Scarlet's orders. That's why she killed Mr. Body and why she killed the cook. So it's easy. Yvette told her about the passageway. That's how she knew about it. That's how she was able to kill the motorist. So what's the verdict for this ending? It checks out pretty well. It's highly possible that the murders were committed this way. Now the second ending tries to say that Mrs. Peacock killed everybody. Remember, that was the woman who was, when everyone was leaving the study to go to the billiard room and check on Yvette, was hanging back. She would lag behind the group a little bit. She was the last one to leave the study. So let's examine where she was at certain parts of the night and see if this checks out. First of all, she wasn't in the billiard room doorway when Yvette was screaming, and she was the last one to leave the study. This means, since the cook was killed with a knife, and the knife was in the study, she could have waited till everyone left the study, picked up the knife, ran towards the group, the huddle by the billiard room doorway, waited a couple seconds for everyone to enter the room, took off to the kitchen, stabbed the cook, and either taken a secret passageway that's in the kitchen, by the way, that leads to the study, taken that back to the study, or just rejoined them in the hall quickly before they noticed she wasn't there. She could have done either of those, and it's, I could understand if she was quiet about it, no one would notice. So that's plausible. She definitely could have killed the cook, and it's probable she did kill the cook. However, I don't know if she was able to kill Mr. Body. Because when we see everyone enter the kitchen, when they go to check for the cook, she's there in the back with everybody. You can see her enter the kitchen. However, there is a point where Colonel Mustard confronts Wadsworth in the kitchen, that same scene. We see her and Professor Plum aren't there anymore. They've disappeared. They're not in the shot. They were at the back, but they're not anymore. So they're unaccountable now. They've been gone for about a minute. I'd say a minute maybe. But you would think they would see them enter and re-enter. That's another thing, is if Mrs. Peacock, because Mr. Body was being killed, this is the only way Mr. Body would have been killed, is if they were in the kitchen. Everyone was in the kitchen and he was alone in the study. That's the only opportunity that the killer had to kill Mr. Body. And she was in the kitchen, and she would have had to have snuck out, killed him, and snuck back in within a minute. I don't think that's very possible, especially because Professor Plum was standing right next to her, would have seen her exit, would have seen her come back, and they would have immediately suspected her later on in the movie when they were mentioning that Mr. Body was killed when everyone was in the kitchen, Professor Plum would have said, wait a second, I saw Mrs. Peacock leave the kitchen. It would come up, you would think. So it's not very possible that she killed the Mr. Body. So even though, like, you could kind of explain Mr. Body, like, it's possible she killed Mr. Body, but I don't see it personally. And it's very possible she killed the cook. However, we have to look at the last 4 murders. Look at the last 4 murders and try and see if it was possible that she killed them. So let's start with the motorist. The motorist was killed when everyone was searching the house. Mrs. Peacock was in the cellar with Professor Plum. This is a very small cellar. It's well lit. There's a long staircase. If she were to exit the cellar, go to the ground floor, unlock the weapons cabinet, head to the conservatory through the secret passageway, kill the motorist, head back through the secret passageway, and then sneak back to the cellar, there is no way Professor Plum would not have heard her, Mrs. Scarlet or Colonel Mustard would have not have heard her, and none of them would have seen her do this. It's pretty impossible. You'd be making a lot of noise. You would have to be very, very quiet, which would require you to move very slowly, and it would take too long. It would simply take way too long to carry out this one murder. And she has such a high chance of getting caught while doing it that I just don't think it's possible that she did it and get back into the cellar without even making it seem like she left. There's no way. Now let's look at the last 3 murders when the light switch was turned off. So in this scenario, in this ending, Mrs. Peacock had to have been the one to turn off the lights. So, okay, whatever. She has to sneak up the stairs to the light switch, which is at the top of the cellar stairs, without Professor Plum noticing her in the light, switch off the lights, then run back down the stairs because we see footage of her struggling with like a heater or like a boiler in the basement, and make a ruckus and make noise so that Professor Plum notices her in the cellar. Then she'd have to run back up the stairs, actually, forget that, tiptoe, be very quiet up the stairs or else he would hear her leaving, go up to the ground floor, kill 3 people, and then make it all the way back down the stairs, all without being noticed. Keep in mind there's 2 people on the ground floor, somewhere. I think Colonel Mustard was in the dining room because we see footage of him in the dining room, and then Miss Scarlet was wherever. But there's 2 people on the ground floor, so you have a very high chance of getting noticed while doing all this. And especially by the person that was with you in the cellar. There's no way you would not make a commotion, you wouldn't be noticed, you wouldn't make a ton of noise, because noise travels, believe me. There's no way she killed those 4 people. It's just impossible. Therefore, because it's impossible for her to do all this undetected and, stealthily, even in the dark, when she shut off the lights, this ending can't be possibly true. Therefore, the verdict is that this is very unlikely. There's very unlikely that it was Miss Peacock. Now, the third ending, ending C, tries to prove that Wadsworth is actually Mr. Body, and every one of the guests ended up killing one person. And I'm gonna rip this one apart because this is probably the least likely one to be true out of all of them. It makes the least sense because there's way too many factors being put into play at once. Let's just examine each explanation for each murder. Right off the bat, it's not very possible that Professor Plum killed Mr. Body, because he did most likely shoot at him in the dark because he had the revolver. That was the weapon he was given. It was probably him that shot at him in the dark, at Mr. Body. But he wouldn't have enough time to exit the kitchen where we saw him when they went to go find the cook, go kill Mr. Body, and come back within a minute and not be detected by Mrs. Peacock, who's next to him and assumably, is still there. Mrs. Peacock killing the cook, however, is one of the only murders in this ending that actually does make some sense. She was the missing person in the billiard room doorway when Yvette was screaming after, Mr. Body had supposedly been killed the first time. And she was also the last person to leave the study when they ran to the billiard room. So she had enough time to not be noticed, to pick up the knife, run past them, undetected, kill the cook, and somehow make it back. We've proved this in the last ending, that she could have done this and, either go through the secret passageway or just quietly rejoined everyone in the hallway. It's possible. Now for the next murder, which is probably the only other one that makes some sense, and that is Colonel Mustard killing the motorist. In the third ending, what happens is Colonel Mustard steals this key to a cabinet that contains all the weapons the guests were given. They were going to throw it out of the door, but he ended up taking it before they could do that. They were huddled at the front door when a motorist whose car broke down arrived, and that's when he stole the key. They let the motorist into the house so that he wouldn't be suspicious. They locked him in the lounge, and then, threw the key outside, which turned out to not be the key to the weapons cabinet. Now later, when everyone split up to search the house, Colonel Mustard separated from his partner who was on the first floor with him, Miss Scarlet, to go to a secret passageway in the conservatory. This happened when they were in the ballroom together. He told her, "You search this room, I'll search the kitchen." That's probably when he split off to, go unlock the cupboard with the weapons and destroy some evidence that was left. I mentioned this before, the evidence in the study at the beginning by Wadsworth. He burned that, took the key to the weapons cabinet, unlocked it, took out a wrench, went to the conservatory, and went through the secret passageway and killed the motorist. Now, he did have a decent time frame while Miss Scarlet was searching the ballroom to pull this off. He definitely did. I just don't see how he would know where the secret passageway was. I don't think he would know where it was, honestly. I don't think he had any informants to tell him there was a secret passageway there. It's possible he just discovered it at one point, but I don't see that. However, it's very, very possible that he killed the motorist. That I can see happening. The next three murders, however, are so incredibly ridiculous. There's no way they could have been pulled off stealthily, and I'm shocked they tried to explain these away. To start off, Mrs. White, who was investigating the second floor, investigating the bedrooms, snuck downstairs from Wadsworth, who was investigating the room next to her, and shut the electricity off. She got the rope from the open weapons cabinet and strangled Yvette, who had previously ran down from the attic to the billiard room. At the same time, Mrs. Scarlet, who was also on the ground floor, retrieved the lead pipe from the cabinet and went to the library to kill the cop at the same time. So it would have been pretty impossible for them to be committing these murders at the same time, because you would think they would see each other going to the weapons cabinet and, moving about the ground floor. And even despite them, let's say they just happened to not run into each other while all this was going on, Mrs. White would have had to rush back up the stairs quickly and quietly after killing Yvette, which, by the way, strangling her would have taken at least a minute. And then she would have had to go and scream in one of the bedrooms, because we see footage of her as the murders are taking place, screaming in the bedroom because a Jack-in-the-Box popped out at her and she got scared. She doesn't have enough of a time frame to pull this off quietly and without being noticed, so it's very, very unlikely she killed Yvette. And while in this scenario, while it's possible that Miss Scarlet killed the cop, I don't think she could have gotten away with it without running into Mrs. White, and then they would have been pointing fingers at each other later on. And I should also mention that while all of this is going on, Wadsworth, who is actually Mr. Body in this ending, also has to have a time frame where he ran downstairs and killed the singing telegram girl who appeared at the door while the blackout happened. He would have had to kill the singing telegram girl after Mrs. White and Miss Scarlet committed their murders. However, this is very unlikely to have happened. Right when the singing telegram girl rang the doorbell, Wadsworth was in the master bedroom trying to get his way to Mrs. White, who was making a fuss and screaming. He ran into a shower and accidentally turned it on. The girl at the front door would have already been murdered at this point, or would have been murdered just before he accidentally turned the shower on. Plus, right after he turns the shower off, he immediately heads downstairs to turn on the lights, not to commit a murder, just to turn the power back on in the cellar doorway. Since Wadsworth would have had to have killed the girl after Mrs. White returned upstairs, since we see him up there trying to find her while she's screaming, and the singing telegram girl was killed after Yvette, we can assume it's highly unlikely that he's killed anyone during the blackout. He would have had to run downstairs at just the right time, open the door and shot the girl, returned just in time for Mrs. White to begin screaming, and then would have had to run back downstairs and turn the power back on. This would have required him to either know everything that was going to happen before the power turned off, which would make him a psychic, or have a ton of luck that everything would fall into place. since there were so many factors going into play during the blackout, I don't think he would have been able to pull off the murder. Since more than half the murders in this ending aren't reasonably explainable and contain lots of contradictions, there's no way this ending could be the real ending at all. Final verdict? No way it's true. So that brings us to the end. Which ending is the actual ending? Well, you could probably guess at this point. After looking through the breakdowns of all three endings, I determined that ending A is the most reasonable ending. Yvette and Miss Scarlet committed the murders. All of the murders by Yvette and Miss Scarlet could have been pulled off relatively easily without them being noticed. They also had the proper knowledge of the house to maneuver around it. Yvette was unaccountable in the kitchen when they found the cook, and she was unaccountable in the study. When she was in the billiard room, she could have snuck out and easily killed the cook. Miss Scarlet's access to the ground floor while everyone was searching the house was the key to her murders being believable, and this ending making sense. Had she not been placed on the ground floor, I would definitely think differently, because all of the murders took place on the ground floor. Therefore, she wouldn't have to do a lot of sneaking about to commit these murders, as if someone spotted her on the ground floor, they would think, oh, she's just searching the house. So that's what I think happened at the end of Clue. That's the ending that I think, in the context of the movie, happened. Who killed who killed Mr. Body, who killed each character, how the murders carried out. That's my take on it. Leave a comment if you think otherwise. If you have any explanations, I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Thank you for watching, because this is going to be a pain to edit. But don't worry about that, that's my job. Thanks for watching this episode of Nonsensical Talks. I'm going to try and get an episode of Nonsensical Cinemas out by Friday. Not sure what I'm going to review yet, but, we'll see. Be sure to tune in next time for an episode of Nonsensical Talks. They premiere either Tuesdays and Fridays. I don't have a set day. I just upload a video Tuesdays and Fridays, so check out those days, if you want to see a new video. And I'll see you guys in the next episode of Nonsensical Cinemas. Peace.